Hello there, Stevos, and welcome to a Let's Talk video for you. I've decided to do this video because obviously there's been a lot of hype and a lot of talk over on YouTube and on social media in regards to the Nintendo Switch 2, which is the brand new console by Nintendo that has recently been released. Obviously, we first got a teaser of the Nintendo Switch 2, when was it? Back in January, February this year. And then of course we then got an official announcement date of when we'll get full details of the Switch 2 console, which was back at the beginning of April. It's crazy to think that a couple of months has gone by already and we are now here in June 2025 and we are talking about the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 console. Nintendo Switch 2 console got released back on June 5th 2025, which was Thursday last week if you're watching this video in real time. Now, admittedly, I don't have my hands on the Nintendo Switch 2 console. I have only got my hands on the Nintendo Switch console, which is the OLED version. It's this one right here. But I thought I would talk about the Nintendo Switch 1 and the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, even though I don't own the Switch 2 console, but I have seen many tech YouTubers and tech reviewers talk about the Switch 2 and give their viewers, their fans, their fan base, their subscribers, you know, a lot of talk about the Nintendo Switch 2 and their initial thoughts. Now, obviously, given the fact that I know that this is going to sound rather weird because I don't have my hands on a Nintendo Switch 2 console, like I've said, but I do want to give my initial thoughts and reaction to the Switch 2 console. And surprisingly, I'm actually in agreement with a lot of the tech YouTubers out there. There's a couple of YouTubers that I have seen out there, and I completely agree with what they're saying in regards to the Switch 2 console, you know. Now, there is also probably a lot of questions as well. So, like I've said, you know, and I've just put this back in the case as well. So I'm having to get this back out of its straps in the case. But this here is the Switch 1. This is actually the Switch OLED model. Now, so far there's been 3 iterations of the Switch 1 that we have seen. So we had the OG Switch, which got released back in 2017, which I was a proud owner of, by the way. And then we had the Switch Lite, where basically you could only play it in handheld mode. You couldn't play it docked in a TV. And my mum was a proud owner of the Switch Lite. And then, of course, we had the Switch OLED, which, again, I'm a proud owner of the Switch OLED, and for me, I feel like the Switch OLED was a big upgrade for the Nintendo Switch, an upgrade that was definitely needed for the Nintendo Switch console, you know. But, I mean, to be honest with you, though, there is minor improvements on the Switch 2 console compared to the Switch 1, which I've got in my hands right here. The first thing is, obviously, the screen size. This is like a 6.9-inch display. Nintendo have increased the screen size by 1 inch, so it's now 7.9 inches screen size. The Joy-Cons on the Switch 2 are a lot bigger than the Switch 1, according to tech YouTubers and stuff. You know, at the moment, I'm going to say, like, I don't really have an issue with holding the Switch 1 in my hands and fiddling around with the controls and stuff. You know, now on the OG Switch, which got released back in 2017, obviously they had a kickstand for the Switch 1, where it was basically a little piece in the corner which you flipped up, and it was just, it weren't great. It was not the best kickstand for a handheld console at all. So when the Switch OLED got released, they fixed that problem by giving us a really big kickstand which you can set up on the table, and then you can play your games on the table, you know, well, I say hands-free, but, you know, you've got your Joy-Cons in your hands with the screen set up on the table. So, for example, you could play something along the lines of Just Dance 2021. You could have the Joy-Cons in your hands, and then, of course, you know, the screen would be sitting up on the table whilst you're dancing to a song from Just Dance, from the category, from the lineup. So, you know, they made that adjustment on the Switch OLED model, didn't they? Obviously, and this kickstand, I think, is by far the most superior kickstand that Nintendo have done so far on their Switch consoles. I'm not going to lie. So yeah, so there is that. You know, so there is that. Obviously, you know, there is a lot of things that have remained the same on the Switch 2 compared to the Switch 1. So obviously you've still got the game cartridge slot. So if I open up this little slot right here, I hope and pray actually on the Switch 2 they have made it a lot more easier, because I feel like for myself, I feel like the card slot thing is just so difficult to actually get open. You have to really dig your finger in. But anyway, so the game card slot is here where my finger is. That's the cartridge slot there. And then obviously you've got the power buttons, and you've got the volume up and down buttons and stuff. You know, you've also got a little storage section as well on the Switch 2, just below the kickstand, by the way, where you can put your SD Express cards. Now, from what I've heard from tech YouTubers, they've only managed to get their hands on a 256 gigabyte SD Express card for the Switch. And I think the SD Express card that they use is by Samsung. It is an official Nintendo licensed SD card for the Switch 2. It's got a picture of Mario on it. I will probably leave an image as I'm talking through this video of what that looks like. But yeah, no, so other than that though, like there's not really a lot of major differences with the Switch 2 compared to what I've got in my hands right now, which is the Switch 1. You know, apart from a bigger screen, slightly bigger Joy-Cons, which gives your hands a little bit more room to kind of move around, I guess, in a way. And then, of course, you've got the SD card slot where the kickstand is. And the kickstand on the Switch 2, by the way, isn't exactly like this one on the Switch 1. It's a lot more thinner than this, and it hasn't got the Nintendo Switch logo. The Switch 2 logo is actually on the back of the console right here as well, so there we go. But yeah, no, other than that though, you know, there is not really a lot of differences with the Switch 1 OLED and the Switch 2. The Switch 2 actually does have an LCD screen. Obviously this is an OLED model, and so, you know, you're going to see a lot more like greys than you are going to see like in terms of like black. When things are pretty dark on the screen, you're going to see more greys than black. So yeah, so that's also another issue, I guess, in a way. So I do feel like the Switch 2 is kind of a bit of a downgrade compared to this model right here that I've got in my hands, which is the Switch 1, which is the fact that this is an OLED model, and then we're reverting back to an LCD model. Now, you're probably asking the question, why is it that Nintendo released this as an OLED model and not released the Switch 2 as an OLED model? It's pretty simple. It's all to do with costs. It does cost a lot more for an OLED screen than it does an LCD screen, and obviously Nintendo are trying to keep the costs down. You know, that's not an indication to say that at some point in the near future we could end up seeing a Switch OLED 2 model. There's a possibility. You know, the possibility is endless really with Nintendo. You just don't know what is around the corner. They could be planning an OLED version of the Switch 2 as we speak right now, you know. They're always planning, they're always innovating, and they're always changing up the design of the Switch, okay? But, you know, in terms of, you know, the Switch 2 having an LCD screen, it's just a lot more cheaper, and it's more affordable for consumers to go out and buy. If we're looking at an OLED model of the Switch 2, I mean, obviously the pricing for the Switch 2 at the moment is £395 for the console here in the UK on its own. To have it bundled with Mario Kart World, which is a Switch 2 exclusive game which you can download digitally through the Nintendo eShop, that is £429, which I'm not going to lie is probably the best option to go for if you are planning to get a Nintendo Switch 2 for yourselves, because if you buy the Switch 2 on its own, it's £395. If you then decide to buy Mario Kart World physically on through, you know, a physical game cartridge, then it's going to set you back another 70 quid. So you may find that actually you're paying technically around about £30 extra for the Switch 2 console, and also Mario Kart World as a game as well. So you're saving a lot more money if you go for the bundle than you do when you go for the Switch 2 on its own. So there is that. But if we're talking about a future OLED Switch 2 though, I'm probably going to say that Nintendo would probably bump up their prices to around about £550 to £600 for the Switch 2 OLED. That's just a possibility, and again, that's only just because of the fact that it's an OLED screen and not an LCD screen, and obviously all this does cost for manufacturers and stuff like that. So there we go. So, but yeah, at the moment, would I consider buying the Switch 2? I mean, it is a possibility that I would love to own the Switch 2. I have seen the 3 variations. I have got to hold the 3 variations of the Nintendo Switch in my hand. Back in 2017, on launch day, I purchased the Nintendo Switch. I actually pre-ordered the Nintendo Switch OG model back in the day, 8 years ago, 2017. And I absolutely loved it. There was quite a few. I think I literally bought every launch game that came to the Nintendo Switch back then as well. And over the years, my games has been stacking up, have been collecting games and stuff like that. I don't think I rushed out to buy the Nintendo Switch OLED model. I think I bought that at a later date, and I think I only bought the Nintendo Switch OLED model because it was on a discount price. So that's why I bought the Switch OLED model. And in terms of the Nintendo Switch Lite, again, it wasn't something I was curious or interested in getting, because it was just a Nintendo Switch, but except the Joy-Cons couldn't be removed, and also as well, you couldn't dock it in the TV. You were just basically playing the Switch games, but just fully in handheld mode, and that's it, And actually, that's another important thing to talk about, is the Joy-Cons, because yes, the Joy-Cons are a lot bigger on the Switch 2, but they are significantly different on the Switch 2 than what they are on the Switch 1. So if I unplug my Joy-Cons right now, right, I'm going to unplug my Joy-Cons right now from the Switch 1, okay, I'm going to show you what they look like. Obviously they look like this, they're quite, feeling them in my hands right now, they're quite tiny, but you will see here that basically you've got like this rail. I don't know if I could do it like this. Again, you got this rail going down, right? And the same with this one as well. If I put it there, you got this rail and it's going down like that, right? Well, anyway, obviously you'll see on the Switch console itself, on the screen, you've got like this little edging bit, and obviously that is where the Joy-Cons fit. So if I line it up, oh, let's try that again. There we go. And then they click in like that, don't they? So, and again, this one here as well. They click in like that. Whereas on the Switch 2 console, they're magnetic. So basically, they just snap onto the console screen magnetically, and then obviously you press the back button. You press this button behind the Joy-Con to remove it. Similar. So yeah, so that's a magnificent change in the Switch 2 Joy-Cons. Also as well, they've also got a sensor underneath one of the Joy-Cons as well, I think, or both Joy-Cons. So it acts as like a mouse as well. And there's a few games that basically act like a computer mouse using the Switch 2 Joy-Cons as well, which is great for gaming as well. A lot of people have actually gave that quite high praise, which is good. And then of course you've got the games, at the moment there's not really, like I said, there's not really a lot of exclusive games on Switch 2 at the moment. Mario Kart World and Cyberpunk are mainly the games that are more Switch 2 exclusive. If you try to insert a Switch 2 game into the Switch 1, it's not going to work. I've seen a tech YouTuber try it, and it just comes up with a message saying unable to read game card. That's all it says. So you know, make sure going forward in the future, if you're still a Switch 1 owner and you're not interested in getting the Switch 2, make sure you're picking up the games that says Nintendo Switch on it, and it's got this Nintendo Switch logo in the corner and it's not in the center, because that is how you're going to be able to tell. Actually, what I will do is I'll leave a photo up right now of what the Switch 2 box looks like the games boxes look like. This is Mario Kart World, for example. Obviously you can't miss it. It will have a massive red banner at the top and it will say Nintendo Switch 2, and yeah, that's how you'll be able to tell the difference if you're buying a physical game for Switch 1 or Switch 2. Switch 2 games are exclusive to Switch 2, by the way. Now, you're probably wondering, well, if there's not that many games for Switch 2, then why is the Switch 2 out now? You know, if there's not that many games, if there's not a wide variety of games, there's a really good thing. So, not only can you get Switch 2 exclusive games for the Switch 2, Mario Kart World, Cyberpunk, there's even some more enhanced versions of Switch 1 games that have come to Switch 2, which I don't really see the point, if I'm being honest with you, about it, because I do feel as though, well, you've bought this game once for Nintendo Switch, why on earth would you pay extra to play the game again on Switch 2, but with more enhanced features and maybe graphics are looking a little bit more better and stuff like that? I don't get it. I really don't. A prime example of this is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. You know, they've got enhanced features, enhanced graphics and stuff like that. But again, you're kind of paying full price for that, for those two games, just to basically replay those games all over again from scratch. I just don't see the point in paying, you know, for that when you've already bought the game once. But, you know, whether it was on launch day or whether it was discounted, regardless, you know, you brought the game once. I just don't see it. But in terms of the other games, though, for Nintendo Switch, so for example, we're talking about games like, I mean, let's talk about like games like, you know, Spyro Reignited Trilogy, Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, Super Mario Odyssey, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Just Dance 2021, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the original OG Switch 1 Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and the same with Tears of the Kingdom, Lego World, Crash Team Nitro Fueled Racing, and all of those different games. Most of the games that you will find on Switch 1 are also playable on Switch 2 as well, because Switch 2 does have the backwards compatibility feature, which is great, you know. So if you are just starting off with a Nintendo Switch 2, then welcome to the Nintendo Switch family. But also as well, it's good to know that you are basically able to play Switch 1 games on the Switch 2 as well as the Switch 2 exclusive games as well. So there is that as well, which is great. You know, again, a lot of people have said, you know, in terms of the Switch 2, you know, in terms of tech YouTubers, they've said that, you know, would they recommend somebody that already owns a Switch 1 OLED model or an OG Switch model, would they recommend you know, buying a Switch 2 right now? They don't. They honestly don't. Yes, there's a few minor upgrades. There's the Nintendo Switch 2 camera, where you can basically have like video or voice calls with people whilst you're playing Mario Kart World and stuff like that. The camera quality on the camera isn't amazing. It's not brilliant as such, but it's there. But again, a lot of people have kind of basically compared the Nintendo Switch 2 camera to something like the Xbox Kinect, for example, you know. And I remember owning the Xbox Kinect. I used to play it for on Xbox 360 years ago, and you know, it was only something that I used for one game only, and then that was it. It was just there for display and display purposes only, you know. So it didn't really get much use out of it, and I feel like that's going to be the same for the peripheral of the Nintendo Switch 2 camera. You know, it's only there to be used for certain games like Mario Kart World at the moment. But is there going to be any other games in the near future that's going to implement the Nintendo Switch 2 camera? Or is it similar to the Xbox Kinect, where we only get to use it for a certain handful of games, maybe 1 or 2, and then that's it? It's just there, just sitting there for display purposes only, really, unless you're using it to play those games. So that's a question that's going to be very interesting to have answered, I believe, really. But obviously there is some other differences with the Switch 2 compared to the Switch 1. So you've got better frame rate, so it's not 60 frames per second anymore, it's 120 frames per second. It's also playing in 1080p as well, in handheld mode, compared to 720p on the Switch 1 console. You know, they've also got the functions of ray tracing as well, and they've also got the DLSS functions as well, which means that they've also got some AI upscaling as well, which is great for the future of gaming, you know. And obviously that's going to be changing and evolutionizing all the time as well, throughout the years to come, especially on the Switch 2 and stuff. Now, admittedly, I'm going to be honest here, you know, the Switch 2 is not in the same margins or on the same lines as the current generation of consoles. So when you look at the PS5 or the Xbox Series X, you know, we're not on that level. The Nintendo Switch, in terms of power, the Switch 2 is on the same level of power as the PS4 or the PS4 Pro, you know. So there's still a generation behind, you know. And I feel like that's probably what Nintendo are probably going to be keeping at, is just keeping a generation behind Sony, a generation behind Microsoft, and stuff like that. So, you know, but I do agree though with a lot of the tech YouTubers, you know, in terms of, would I recommend buying a Nintendo Switch 2 right now? Well, if you are new to the Switch family, then yes, sure. Go for the upgraded version, go for the Switch 2, get that Mario Kart World as well bundle. That's the one that I'd highly recommend getting, is the one bundled with Mario Kart World. If anything, I'm probably going to do that myself if I end up getting a Switch 2 console at some point in the near future. But is it a console that I'm rushing out to get as a Switch 1 owner, a Switch 1 OLED owner? It's not. It really isn't. Obviously, I want to see first what other games are coming to Switch 2 first before I go out and buy the Switch 2 model, because, you know, if there's more exclusive Switch 2 games coming that are going to be great, or do look great, then it's something that I would definitely want to play on the Switch 2. You know, I think also the big bummer here is the fact that Nintendo didn't release the Switch 2 with a 3D Mario platformer game. Yes, they released it with a Mario Kart game, and that's great, because I definitely do love Mario Kart, and I would definitely love to play Mario Kart World, of course I would. But I feel like, though, the biggest sale as well behind this is also releasing a Mario platformer game. So that is unfortunate, really, that they didn't release the Switch 2 with a 3D Mario platformer game. And I'm talking like, you know, Super Mario Odyssey 2, for example, or something like that, you know. If they ever make a sequel to Super Mario Odyssey, yes, I would definitely 100% be down to play that. But, yeah, no, in all seriousness, though, you know, if you are planning to get a Switch 2 and you're a Switch 1 owner, I would hold off for the time being. You're not missing out on much other than the game chat feature, which is implemented in certain games and stuff like that. You know, the Switch 2 camera as well. You know, you are getting a lot more storage, onboard storage on the Switch 2 compared to the Switch 1. The Switch 1, you only got 32 gigabytes of storage. On the Switch 2, however, you get 256 gigabytes of storage. So it's not really, that's quite a huge difference in terms of onboard storage. You know, you're not having to go through, you know, SD cards and stuff like that, like there's no tomorrow. You know, you do get some more onboard storage, which is great. But yeah, honestly though, I mean, I am going to hold off getting a Switch 2 console myself. You know, I mean, who knows, we may get halfway through this year. We may go into Black Friday in November or something like that, and then might end up having a deal on the Switch 2 console then, and if so, it could be something I may pick up for myself as either A belated birthday present to myself, or B, an early Christmas present to myself. So we'll see what happens there. But if I do end up getting the Switch 2 console for myself though, of course I will do an unboxing video and give you my initial thoughts properly then. But I just thought for now though, I would kind of give you my thoughts on the Switch 2 now, you know, and just talk to you about what my actual thoughts are on the Switch 2, you know. So, and also as well, this is also the really annoying thing here, you know, and this really worked well for the Nintendo Wii, when the Nintendo Wii first launched. You may remember when, if you are, you know, as old as I am, this is kind of giving my age away here, but if you are, if you remember the days of the Nintendo Wii, the Nintendo Wii launched with Wii Sports, and Wii Sports went on to become one of the most successful games for the Nintendo Wii because it was included as part of the Nintendo Wii. And you know, with Wii Sports, it kind of showed you all the functions and stuff of what the Nintendo Wii could do. Well, obviously, with Nintendo Switch, it's completely different. I'm just trying to work out if I've got it on me right now. It doesn't look like I do have it on me right now, but I did have a game called 1-2 Switch, which was one of the launch titles. Again, I remember having to buy that game, 1-2 Switch, and again, that was showing you the functions of how the Nintendo Switch console works. And then obviously now we've got the Nintendo Switch 2, and they have come with a welcome guide or a welcome tour, and it's basically a digital version of the instructions of how to use the Nintendo Switch 2, and it's showing off the functionalities, the new functionalities that you get with the Switch 2 console. Now, this is very controversial, and I do agree with all the tech YouTubers out there and all the other people out there who have reviewed the Nintendo Switch 2 already. Nintendo have decided to release the welcome guide or the welcome tour for the Switch 2 for a price of around about £8 here in the UK, which you can buy on the Nintendo eShop. And also as well, not only that, but in order to completely complete the welcome guide tour, you have to have pretty much every accessory going. So the Pro Controller, the Switch 2 camera, and all of that, you have to have that as well in order to complete every single part of the welcome guide. So we're not just talking about a game that's costing £8, we're talking about a game that could essentially be costing you around about somewhere between £100 to £150, and that's just on the accessories, you know. So it's a very controversial thing. I do think, you know, I'm not saying that the welcome guide or welcome tour for Switch 2 would have been a very successful game for the Switch 2, but you just never know really. I mean, obviously it is filled with mini games and all of this stuff that you can play on the Switch 2, you know, and it's just trying to get you used to the functions and, you know, your surroundings of the Switch 2 console. But I just feel like it's quite hefty for Nintendo to do that really, you know, is to slap a price on a instruction manual digitally for the Switch 2. So yeah, and a lot of people are saying exactly the same thing. Why did that game not come free with the Switch 2? Why is there an added price on that game? So there we go. But either way though, I've spoken a bit too much in regards to the Switch 2. I hope I have managed to cover everything that is different in terms of the Switch 2 compared to the Switch 1. I hope you guys have found this video to be rather informative as well, and I hope you guys have enjoyed hearing me talk about the Switch 2 and my initial thoughts. Yes, it is something that I will probably plan to get later down the line, but I just want to see first what other games Nintendo have got lined up first for the Switch 2. But for the time being though, I wouldn't highly recommend getting the Switch 2 at the moment, because of just how little exclusive games there are for the Switch 2. And, you know, it might be slightly brighter, the screen, compared to the OG Switch LCD screen, but again, I feel like controversially it's still a bit of a downgrade given the fact that we've been given a Switch OLED model. But like I said earlier in the video, there's every possibility we could end up seeing a Switch OLED 2 model at some point within the next couple of years, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens. If you have enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment in the comment section down below, and as always, if you are new around here and you like what you see, feel free to hit that subscribe button down below to become a Stevo. And from me, it's goodbye. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys again in my next YouTube video.